In talking a little bit about success, it's a tough kind of word within the student athlete world, I feel like, because a lot of us are high achievers, very much so perfectionists in a sense where success is this super high bar that we set for ourselves. And if it's not achieved, then, hey, we're, a failure, a disappointment, whatever it is. But ultimately for you, Colin, what does success kind of look like for you? And how has that definition really evolved over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you phrased it perfectly there, and that there's kind of you don't achieve everything and have this perfectionist mindset, then you achieve nothing. And for the longest time, that was something I really struggled with. I think I talked about earlier, how I kind of felt, my self-worth. I wasn't doing enough to, feel worthy sometimes. And I think that was a big reason why was I had this idea of I have to dominate and be perfect. And if I don't achieve that, then worthless to to a capacity. So that's something for me that's really evolved over time. And I think for the longest time, and I mentioned earlier, like I wanted to play at the highest level I possibly could, and I wanted to get there as quick as I could. And I think I was naive and unrealistic in that sense. And I put myself in a predicament that was probably easily avoidable looking back at it. So I think it's really evolved for me now of just trying to be the best version of myself, trying to reach my full potential. And, that's something I still will admit, like, I probably can improve at and continuously reminding me myself of that and just telling, like, hey, like, just be the best version of yourself each day, just maximize whatever you have. And, I still probably compare too much, I still probably want external things too much. And I think it's sometimes really difficult not to do it. I think there are athletes and there are people in the world that have mastered it, but it's very, very, very few. And I think, sometimes competing against and wanting external things is good. Wanting external goals to kind of push you on is good. But at the end of the day, you have to set up your self-worth where it's not based on external things because you put yourself in a predicament if they're not achieved and just value improving and being the best version of yourself. And that's what I try to do, but I will be the first one to admit that I probably need to improve like almost every other person at that as well.
But ultimately, too, sports come with a lot of pressure, whether it's the pressure to win, the pressure to perform, the pressure to be a good teammate, you name it. There's a ton of different pressures in every single sport, regardless of the situation, regardless of the position you play. Ton of pressure. For you, Colin, what has been kind of, some specific stuff that you've really tried to work on throughout your journey as a student athlete to kind of diminish the internal pressure inside of you and say, hey, I'm really going to try to build up more confidence in those situations and try to be, that person who doesn't really crumble under the pressure, but who overcomes that and says, you know what, I'm the bigger person. It might be a high pressure situation, but ultimately I've prepared so much and my mental game is so on point that I'm not going to let this affect me.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, that was a question I've kind of, when you gave me this list of questions, I thought about a lot because I don't really have a great answer to this. I think for me, for the longest time, I worked tirelessly, probably too much at times to kind of make myself feel so confident and make myself in those pressure situations feel so prepared. And, I think I was in a lot of ways working for the wrong reasons in some capacity. I was working to not be nervous rather than have confidence, and that's something I've kind of had to adjust to because I would still get in the situation. I'd still not be nervous. I mean, I honestly really believe in the idea that, not at least athletically in terms of the pressures you have, a lot of it just comes from doing the action in a pressure-filled situation time and time again. And that's something that's been difficult for me because, I haven't come to realize that. And sometimes you can't mimic certain situations, like, I think a lot of student athletes in college can mimic this, but the first time they step on a field in a college environment, there's going to be pressure because you've never stepped on the field. Or if you don't play that much early on in your college career and get opportunities, after a year or so, whatever, it's hard to be come into the situation and completely, hit the ground flying. Like you've never been in that situation before unless you almost have a false sense of confidence, which if you do, all the power to you. I think there's other issues with that sometimes, but in that situation it benefits you. But I think just acknowledging that, the pressure in a lot of certain situations is only something you're going to learn how to deal with going through it. And I think you see that at the professional level all the time of, a lot of times a guy's in a really pressure-filled situation the first time, he might crumble. He might not succeed the first time. I can think of like, at least on the soccer example, there's a player, Bakayo Saka, who plays for Arsenal in the English national team. He took a penalty in the 2021 Euro, I believe, and missed, and he lost his country the Euro, which would have been the first chance for them to win a trophy in a really, really long time. And that was, I think, the first time he'd been in that pressure-filled situation as a penalty taker. And since that penalty, he's been probably one of the best penalty takers in the world because now he's gone through that situation at the highest pressure capacity and gone through it. So I think just trying to put yourself in situations that are extremely have a lot of pressure involved in them as much as possible is probably the best way to do it. But you also have to acknowledge that, the first couple of times it might be really difficult and you might succumb to the pressure and just, have to be okay with that as difficult as it might be.
Looking back, Cullen, on your athletic journey so far, I mean, what advice would you give yourself, knowing everything that you know today? What would you give yourself, say, a couple years back, whether it was going into Bryant, whether it was, before you played in Costa Rica, any moment of your career, what would you go back and give yourself some advice on?
This is actually a question I think about a decent amount because I actually ask this question myself sometimes on my podcast. But I think for myself, just I easily could say like I'd go back to when I was 12 and tell myself, start working more on this or more on that, physically or whatever. I think the true moment I would go back to is when I was in Costa Rica for the first time during my senior year. And, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself at the time in terms of like I wanted to go play, at a Division 1 level in college at the time. And it was during COVID and, it was difficult at the time just because of the situation I was in. And then also I was, kind of for the first time realizing ambitions of playing beyond that. And I was putting a lot of external pressure on myself and just feeling like I had to make everything externally work, and that if it didn't work, it was my own fault. And I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to myself is really just enjoy it and have a belief that if you do everything right and, are a good person and, have the right values, it's going to work out in some capacity. And, I'll openly admit I'm not the best player in the world. I'm not close to the best player on my team currently. There's a lot of other players that are a lot more talented and gifted than I am, but just by having the right values, by working hard, by wanting to learn, by being a good teammate, a good person, being curious, it's everything's kind of worked out for me and got me to a position where I am today. And I would just tell myself like just enjoy it. Just, have the confidence it's gonna work out in some capacity. And if you go through a setback, still have that confidence, I'm gonna make it work. I'm gonna make it work, and then just enjoy it. I think I would have had, not that I had bad experiences, and I honestly wouldn't change a lot of my experiences in the slightest because I've learned so much from each of them and each of the hardships and everything like that. But I probably would have had a lot more fun and a lot more enjoyment if I knew that and had that mentality going in. I got to play against so many unbelievable players in my time in Spain and Costa Rica and some unbelievable coaches and meet some unbelievable people. And I don't think I enjoyed it enough and was in the right mental place at times to really appreciate it until after the fact. And I really wish I could have enjoyed it more in the moment and appreciated it more. So that'd be the biggest piece of advice I'd give to myself.
Yeah, just being able to enjoy it, I think, is so important because when we look back when we were super young, 5, 6 years old, we thought of the sport not necessarily as, hey, we want to be, the best of the best. We just thought it was fun to go out there and compete with our best friends and hang out with them and play a sport that we all love. And sometimes, the harsh reality is that sometimes it turns more into that job setting than it does the sport that we love and we have so much passion for and we're so excited to be able to play it. So I love that you mentioned that, just enjoy it and really embrace that. But I know you briefly mentioned it, and again, I want to give you the floor. Do you mind kind of talking a little bit more about your podcast, Colin? Number one, kind of the reason that you started that and started, really capturing all those moments. Number two, what are you, I guess, looking to achieve in those podcast conversations, and what can somebody expect from listening to, a podcast on your channel?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, and I've alluded to it a couple times. But I guess about a year ago this time, I started to work on a podcast relating to, at the time, was covering the fourth division of soccer here in the US. And I'm playing in that division and was playing in that division at the time as well. And, originally I started it up because podcasts were such a big part of my life when I was kind of enduring some of the struggles. I listened to a lot of podcasts from other professional players or just very successful people talking about a lot of the feelings I was going through. And it made me feel like I was less alone, especially, listening to people that are way more successful than me and have accomplished way more in their respective lives than I have. So for me, it felt really cool to do it. And I felt it was really interesting to me just to be able to talk to other people. And, at the time too, I will be a little bit honest, I was a little bit selfish in that I wanted to learn from a lot from the people around me and kind of continue to learn. And I knew the best way to do that was actually going through these conversations. And there was also a big part of me that wanted to give a lot of other people the platform to express their stories and tell their stories. And that was I think the other biggest reason I started it up. And that really became my main source of motivation with it as it kind of grew. And, we covered college soccer in the fall. And, obviously being a college soccer player myself, I was able to give so many players a platform to kind of express themselves and tell other people about their journey and kind of the hardships they endured and just make everyone within the soccer community, especially the college soccer community, kind of relate to each other and realize that everyone is a lot more similar than they necessarily realize. And that was so crucial for me and just kind of trying to bring everyone together and inspire everyone, I guess, in a sense. And it's kind of really transformed into that now. I think a lot of the conversations are different now. I think back then it was kind of, I wouldn't say a cookie cutter approach, but a lot of the conversations were very much the same now, as whereas now they kind of differ. Now I speak with college soccer coaches sometimes about, their pathways or just topics around the college soccer game, but they're all kind of around the same basis of just trying to help college soccer and really soccer improve in general. And I think so much of that comes from mentally, people enduring mental challenges they kind of face and how to get over that. So I think for myself personally, that's where a lot of the conversations kind of go through. But they also change. Like I had a conversation recently, I haven't posted the interview, but a lot of it had to deal with purpose throughout your life. And I was speaking with someone who's, now been out of the game a couple of years now, but we talked a lot about, dealing with now not feeling like you have as much purpose now that you're not playing and kind of having to transform your identity and everything like that. And so I think all the conversations just revolve around one, trying to improve as a player and trying to improve the game of soccer as much as we can, but really just trying to improve as a person. And I think that goes so much related with being an athlete is just if you become a better person in every single capacity, you'll become a better player. So I think that's where a lot of the conversations stem toward and just moving forward, I think it'll be a lot more the same. We provide a lot more news coverage now. I'm lucky I don't do that myself. I don't have the time to do that. Unfortunately, I have other people that I work with that do that, which is really cool. And I think it provides a lot of people with cool content. And then, a big part for me is I'm also trying to give back and provide opportunities to a lot of people. I think that's something along with growing the podcast and helping people improve in terms of obviously, as I spoke upon, becoming better players and better people, I want to give people opportunities as well to show that. And I think, I've been trying to launch recruitment showcases recently, and that's been a whole set of challenges, but we're starting to feel like move forward with that a little bit. But that's, I think, kind of what we can expect moving forward from the podcast.
And as we kind of start getting a little bit closer to, closing and wrapping stuff up here, I always love to really end the podcast on good notes where people are smiling and reminiscing about a lot of great times during their athletic career. Because sometimes for myself, I get so caught up in a lot of the day-to-day grind of it that sometimes we forget about those bright, shining star moments. And so for you, Cullen, what has been, one or two of your favorite memories during your journey as a student athlete?
Again, that was something I kind of had to think about myself because I get really caught up in the day-to-day grinds of it too. One of them I will say has nothing to do with playing, and that I will go back to the podcast and just, listening to people tell me how much that's helped them or how much they listen to it, especially, high level individuals, whether that be coaches or players, has been one of the shining moments so far in, my student athlete journey because I realized how much bigger that is and a lot of individual accomplishments I have. I realize how many people that impacts. So for me, that's been one of the best feelings I could have had, throughout this journey. And I never thought I would say that as an answer to it. And, I think the other one too was, just kind of my journey, I think is a lot different in that the first year I was at a place that I probably wouldn't say I didn't belong at, but was at ability wise was with some unbelievable players, and was around an environment where pretty much all my teammates had been professionals already or were going to be professionals. And I think we've had 5 or 6 guys now from that team go pro, which at the Division 2 level is almost unheard of. And it was just kind of having that feeling of belonging at the end of that season, and just seeing the internal development within myself was, I think, a really shining light for me. And just because it was a moment that I could capture where I really improved. And it was also, I was going through a time period where, as I talked about there, I was really trying to focus on internal improvement and really trying to highlight that rather than externally, because, externally we were having a ton of success as a team, and I really couldn't complain about that. And, I could easily say, oh, the feeling of winning a national championship that year was an amazing accomplishment and all that. And it was cool. But I think for myself personally, feeling like I am a part of this team, I do belong on this team, was probably the biggest feeling I had all year, rather than, an external feeling where, it can be taken different ways.
For one last closing, one last message from you, Cullen. I want to give you the floor one last time, and if there's any piece of wisdom that you'd love to really kind of shout out to the listeners today, or even one piece of encouragement that, hey, maybe a student athlete can relate, maybe someone's going through something, and I think that this message would ultimately help this student athlete or someone along their journey, what would that be?
I think I'll give a couple, and I think the first one I'll say, and I've alluded to this a few times, but just continually try to learn and improve in every capacity of your life. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give to any student athlete, because what will come with that is success and, whatever you're doing in your life. And I think once I really embrace that mindset of just trying to learn and educate myself in every single manner, I've seen the biggest piece of development within my life. And then, I will say, for those that feel like, they're going through struggles or hardships in the moment that, might be difficult, or, might not feel like, it's very just relatable to them. I think, I will say, like, nobody's alone going through whatever hardships or struggles you are in. I know that's a little cliche to say, but I think, that's the biggest thing I've learned during my time period of speaking with so many other high level individuals throughout the sport of soccer, is just you don't realize how similar you are to any individual, whether that's a professional or, somebody that's not at the highest level of their field. Everybody is so similar and so alike. And once you kind of realize that, you realize you're not alone, and that helps dramatically. So those are the two biggest pieces of advice I would give to any respective student athlete.
Awesome. Well, that was great, man. And again, I can't thank you enough for your time today. But again, it was great just learning more about your story, more about your journey, about starting up the podcast, and how you're able to even help out student athletes right now. I mean, you're a sophomore and you're able to help out current student athletes. That's awesome. And that's something that you should always embrace and just know, like, hey, like I'm helping out the greater good of the community right now. So that's super, super cool. And for everybody listening, tuning in, all that good stuff. Again, talked about it a little bit earlier, but all of Cullen's socials, I'll make sure to plug below. Go check it out. Go give him a follow. Go listen to his podcast again. Great, great content, all of that good stuff. And without further ado, thank him one last time. He was a great guest on here, had a lot of great answers. Hopefully some of this stuff really resonates with you guys, depending on where you're at in your student athlete journey. But other than that, we will see you guys in the episode next week.